Alright, hello everybody again. Board game. This time again Lasker on the white side again, Capablanca on the black side. We go back into the Queen's Gambit. D4, D5, C4, E6, so the declined, Knight C3, Knight F6, and we go back to the classical variation, not the modern exchange variation, which is more popular nowadays, but the bishop g5s that were contested back in the day a lot. So very normal moves. Pin, unpin, bishop e7. White ensures the center and defends the c pawn here. Bishop is ready to develop here. Black castles. Well, white brings out the knight first. Normal move. And then knight bd7. Obviously we wanna at some point to take back with the knight if white ever takes here, which is unlikely to do. Well, at least not yet. It does happen sometimes that this trade actually exists. Well, here we get queen c2. First putting the queen on the long diagonal here. Capablanca and Lasker both had been here on the white side previously. Here Capablanca's opponent Perkins, for instance, continued with rook e8. Capa went rook c1, c6, bishop d3, takes, knight d5. So quite similar to what the game continuation here goes on. Well, Lasker's game actually I think was a simul. His opponent went b6 here. And then we got chop, bishop chop, knight chop, bishop d3. And Lasker actually went to lose this game on white side. Anyways, now we get something different. So after queen c2, in this game, Capa's choice is c6 straight up. Solid stuff. c6, of course, hints that because often the undermining moves here are, because this guy is definitely buried inside here. But usually the stuff here is that like at some point we take and play c5 or c6, of course, hints that well, at least it's a tempo loss. It still could happen to c5 here, but more likely to happen is that they're gonna take at some point and stick b5 in. Well, now white does eventually develop their bishop, which they eventually usually have to. They don't wanna take here and then black probably now take, and the bishop is ready to eventually get out somewhere around here. Or well, there's also some downside, of course. This side it's very hard to get to f5. Anyways, now we chop, and we don't get b5, which would also be fine here. Bishop d3, bishop b7. It's always a little hassle to get all the moves in, so you are ready to play the b5 and open this up, because the b5 of course needs some guarding here. So let's say white castles. You have first you probably have to defend the b-pawn. Now you might be threatening this, but let's say black plays something like here. And now these are not yet threatening, because there's a little annoyances here in a way that you can chop here. And then like at the right time this is gonna usually take one defender off, and well, here it's even the worst because bang, you lose the queen. So it's not always so easy to get this in. And usually black at some point has to play like h6 to make white do something about this and ensuring this here. And white sometimes can have time to play a6, a3, b4 and try to make this into an backwards pawn. It's a battle of like if black manages this on good terms, usually he's pretty good doing pretty well here. Anyways, in a game we go knight d5, which resolves this tension here while we distracted the bishop of the h7. So now the knight move is at this moment possible. Bishop is kind of has to trade. Well, it doesn't really definitely want to retreat here. That's off the menu probably. But maybe, well, h4 is probably like the fishing pole kind of a thing. Black might just regret this a lot so suddenly. h4 definitely is a way to try to maintain the bishop here. Of course, black doesn't actually have to take it. He can play h6. Still, is this a threat, or black can pretty much ignore it forever and or take at the right moment? Anyways, white just took in a game. No funny business. Retakes with the queen, castles, and then black takes on the c3. Well, this looks really good for white in a way that we have a really nice looking center. Good pieces. Black is really solid though. His pieces are still, they look undeveloped, and they are. But white is not really threatening anything at the moment. So we get b6, bishop is coming out, getting ready to play c5. Well, white hits the pawn here, and black defends it with the, well, he could play knight here. But then the knight is not here and also loses the grip of here, so maybe the knight could swing here. It's probably not a big deal again, but black decides to defend the pawn with the g6. Which of course always is a risky decision, but without the dark squared bishop to hamper around, and well, the queen and the knight are kind of far away still from the trying to get into the holes and cause problems, so it seems so fine here. Well, white decides to go for a minority attack here. Options were always the e4 at some point here. They might turn into a little bit of Grunfeld-like endgame, so this goes here. I don't know, this chop probably happens at some point, like well, I don't know, let's get out of the C file if rooks get there, and I don't know, random h3. I was just gonna demonstrate that this kind of a little Grunfeldian endgame is definitely possible in these. Black has the extra pawn on the queen side, white has the extra pawn in the center. It's about equal, except I did throw in a few random moves to show this out. Anyways, we do get something different here. Well, that doesn't really rule out that endgame either, but we get a4, a bit of a minority attack here, trying to squeeze some kind of a weakness on this side. Black plays bishop b7, and the pawn goes burr. And black ignores it. Of course, if you push that one, then, I don't know, maybe here, and then it starts to look a little vulnerability here with the inability to move forward here. So black side opens the bishop up, maybe threatens to take here, and finally challenges it to the center. Again, e4 is possible, and then we probably end up in something like Grunfeldian endgames at some point, like white has their central pawn duo. Black has a lot of freedom for the pieces at the moment, at least. And the extra pawn here, I don't know what that is about, but this could be a weakness or a strength here. Instead, we don't get anything like that. White is not interested in playing e4 yet. He just sidesteps the knight here. He just wants to trade this bishop away, which does seem pretty great. And white's counterpart is not looking so hot at the moment. So we get e5, black's going all in on the killing the center business here. White goes with their plan. Chop chop, very ambitious plans with Lasker. In a way that, of course, material is getting reduced and reduced. He's gonna have a little squeeze in the end game. And I guess that was his strategy in most of the games. He keeps it simple and tries to squeeze, but he's playing Capablanca, who's pretty good at that kind of a chess too. Rook a e8. Black abandons the queenside completely and goes for the central play. Wants to resolve this nonsense here. Black says chop chop. So now we did get a bit of a backwards pawn here. Here white could play d5. Make himself a passed pawn. Let's say knight f6. Here black should probably say no to any e4s from white and play e4. White wants to play c4. And black could even say no to that one in a way that this is undefended. We could even see something like a c4, b4. Both sides have the passed pawns here, and this might be a little vulnerability here. Well, it would have been a possibility. Instead, another very natural looking move. White swings to the 7th rank and pins the knight. Well, black says chop. Queen trade offered. Here, white definitely could take it. He keep this kind of a pin on. Chop, chop, chop. Both sides have an isolated pawn. There's some annoyances here. How to resolve this? The rook could be annoying, like here. This is still equal, but I feel like it's a bit annoying to play as black equal. But since white's passed pawn is kind of close to the king side in a way that the king is here, it's probably even drawish, even if we somehow lost this pawn, which is not obvious at all that we will, in a way that white doesn't lose this back. So I think it's still equal in a way, but not fun. Instead of that, white tries a little tricks here in between. Doesn't take back, but goes and says, give me the knight. Well, in a game, black just defends the knight, but he could have maybe tried, well, this is not a good idea, but it looks somewhat tempting, but doesn't end up well though. Black gets a lot of pawns, but piece is a piece in the end though. And white does start to collect the pawns back too. It looks a bit dangerous, but not dangerous enough, and white just probably ends up winning with the extra piece here. Black has few pawns for it, but shouldn't be enough. So here, black just defends this. But isn't this quite annoying? How do you resolve this nonsense here? Now white chops back their pawn. Pop, pop. But here black has a neat little trick to get out of this completely and plays queen f6. Knight is hanging, but pop and then pop. So after the trades, the knight gets out of the way. Pawn is hanging, white defends that. Black defends their knight. There should not be anything left here to play. The knight is especially beautiful here, where it's like not only blocking the white pawn, it's defending the own pawn, and even keeping the e7 and c7 in a way that white is definitely not even doing any rook lifts in the future anyways. Not that they were that dangerous at the moment anyways. Well, white puts the pressure on the b pawn. Black plays f6, takes away some squares from the knight, but mostly he wants to trade the the rook on the 7th. Now white sidesteps the back rank problems without making a luft, like king is getting closer to the center. Endgame, endgame. Black says, I don't like the rook on the 7th, so let's trade those off. White says, I'd like to keep a rook on the 7th. There again, like black could take and play rook b8 in a way that he wants to run the pawn through. White could harass the knight a little bit. This is probably not like white easily gets under the pawn, so the piece sacks are not working at all, of course. So the knight has to go somewhere, but it's feel like it's definitely a little bit annoying to play as black. It should be equal, but with the king cut off on the back rank there, it's definitely really annoying in a way. I don't know, this is probably gonna end up in some kind of trade-off, but there is like a definite potential to here to lose this game in some way. Probably there is no, like at some point the white has to release the king, or well, maybe he could go there, but then this thing happens here, and well, at least it looks really risky to risk all your king side. But there is some potential here with this pawn though, so I don't know, it would get really spicy. Real spicy around here, but probably the king is still close enough to the d pawn here to make it less, or just draw still. But I think in general, the outside passed pawns tend to be a little more dangerous than the closer than the king passed pawns. The king can help more easily to stop this one than white king, this counterpart here. Anyways, here neither side wants to, like white wants to keep the rook on the 7th and black definitely doesn't want the rook here, so he plays rook dd7. White says chop, black says chop. Okay, to take some squares away from the knight. Black goes behind their passed pawn. White brings the king closer, black does the same. All are like moves that a good player would play in a blitz game without thinking. Like we put the rook behind the passed pawn, we bring the king closer to the center when the end game phase. White centralizes the king, black kind of does the same. He doesn't want to push the pawn too far because it might become a vulnerability if it advances too far. Here we agreed to a draw, or again maybe actually the draw was agreed after the g3 move. These were just like me looking at the few lines that I forgot. The actual game ended after g3 here, but those would have been pretty natural ways to continue the game. Very uneventful game. I apologize to anybody who watched this far, but to the sake of completeness, we have to look at these. And well, again, I think solid normal chess is part of the, or a very important part too. It's just not the fancy flashy tactics all the time too. Now that I look at this, also probably very tempting would have been something like check and bring the rook behind the passed pawn, but I assume this is still not enough to go on about it. We have still the knight in a nice place here, so we can, and the king is kind of close to the action too, so we could even activate the rook at this moment too. Probably everything is always 0, 0, 0, zeros. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully next game we'll have some flesh on the field.